On September 3rd, 1974, four friends from Missoula, Montana, who were in their mid-20s, Amy, Ezra, Lucas, and Nicole, left to go backpacking in the Flathead National Forest for a week. Days later, Amy was found haggard, walking along Highway 83. A passerby picked her up and took her to Kalispell, where she was dropped off at the sheriff's station. She was then quickly taken to the local hospital, where she was questioned. What she told the deputies was unbelievable and terrifying. This is her story. I barely made it out alive. Don't ask me to go back. I'm never going there again. I don't even know where to begin. You're not going to believe what I'm about to tell you. This was the fourth backcountry hiking trip we'd done this year, and was going to be the last. Before going, we always pick a random spot on the map. It has to be miles into the backcountry, away from any trails, and close to water. This time was no different. It was my turn to choose. I remember easily picking a spot that was a ways back and close to a small lake. I can't even remember now exactly how many miles it was, but I'd say 12 to 15 at least. We parked at the trailhead about 7 a.m., grabbed our gear, and started hiking. We needed to hike along the trail for about 5 miles before we'd veer left, leaving the trail and heading towards the lake. The 5-mile hike on the trail went fast as we talked and laughed about many things. It wasn't until we left the trail things began changing. For some reason, the talking ceased as we got off the trail. It was strange. It was like suddenly none of us wanted to talk anymore. We went from having good banter back and forth to eerie silence. The only words exchanged until we made it to the lake were about which way to go. When we arrived later that afternoon, I remember thinking the lake looked like glass. We then looked for a spot to set up camp, which wasn't difficult, being the area surrounding the lake wasn't very thick. In front of us, though, on the other side, was a large, steep mountain mostly made up of rock. As I looked over the mountain, I could see what looked like a cave about halfway up the mountain. I thought nothing of it as I started unpacking and setting up the tent. After camp was set up, Nicole and I made a fire and started cooking canned meat and biscuits for dinner. "Dang, that sure smells good, ladies. What's for dinner?" asked Lucas. "Canned beef and biscuits," I replied. "Nice, I'm starving," said Ezra. "It should be ready in a few minutes," replied Nicole. As we ate dinner, we told jokes and stories, reminiscing about when we were younger, as we'd all been good friends since junior high. I don't remember when we went to bed, but it was late. I'm usually a heavy sleeper, but when I'm camping, the tiniest noise wakes me up. I always share a tent with Nicole, and she falls asleep first and snores, so that makes it hard. Some nights when we're camping, it's dead silent, and other nights I hear things walking around. I never stick my head out of the tent though, because I'm too scared, so I just lay there wondering what it is. That first night was no different. I was laying there thinking about having to go back to my college after this trip when I heard the faint sound of something walking straight at the tent. I've camped enough to know the usual sounds of animals walking, but whatever that sound was, it was not any animal I've heard before. My body stiffened with fear as I debated whether or not to wake up Nicole, who was snoring loudly next to me. I nearly screamed as a footstep stopped right next to the tent, by my head. Sweat poured down my face as I was scared out of my mind. Minutes of silence went by, then suddenly whatever it was turned and slowly walked off, as I breathed a sigh of relief. After a while, I was able to fall asleep, getting only a few hours. When I awoke that morning, the first thing I said to everyone was, "Did anyone hear that thing that came into camp last night?" "Nope, didn't hear a thing," replied Lucas. "What did you hear?" asked Nicole. "I'm not sure, but it wasn't any animal I've heard before. It sounded big and two-legged to me," I hesitantly responded. "Two-legged? What are you talking about? There's no two big-legged animals out here. Maybe you just heard it wrong," replied Ezra. I said nothing to Ezra's comment. I know what I heard. After getting out of the tent, I checked the area, especially around my tent, for footprints, but there were none. That day was fun as we cooked, swam in the lake, and did some hiking. I'd completely forgotten about the previous night, that is, until it was time to go to bed. As it came flooding back into my mind, the fear I'd felt before hit me. I almost brought it up as we got into our tents, but decided there was no point. It wasn't long before Nicole was out and snoring. I could also hear Ezra and Lucas slightly snoring as I laid there with only my thoughts to keep me company. I finally started drifting off to sleep when I was jolted awake to something running towards our camp. I could hear it getting closer and closer, then suddenly it stopped. I was about to yell out to everyone. Before I could, though, I heard the sound of Ezra's and Lucas's tent being ripped open. I then heard what sounded like struggling. "What the hell?" shouted Lucas. "Hey, what's going?" said Ezra as he was cut off. I then heard a man in a deep voice say, "God, turn me into this hideous monster. I now desecrate his children." It sounded like they were being pulled out of their tent, then it went completely silent. Nicole was starting to wake up, so I put my hand over her mouth and whispered, "There's a man or something in camp. It just got Lucas and Ezra. Be quiet and don't move." She nodded her head as I removed my hand. I lay there contemplating what we should do when suddenly I heard the running again. Only this time it was moving away from camp. "Nicole, did you hear that?" I asked. "Yes, what the hell is that?" she replied. "I don't know, but we have to go now or we're next. We can't stay here," I said as I started crying hysterically. I quickly grabbed the flashlight I kept next to me as we both clambered out of our sleeping bags, then unzipped the tent. As we stepped out, we could see through the big hole in their tent Ezra and Lucas were gone, which shocked me being they were both big and played football in high school. Without thinking, we turned and began running in the opposite direction we'd heard the thing go. "Where are we going?" cried out Nicole as we ran through the forest. "I don't know, but we need to get as far away from camp as we can," I replied. We ran and ran until we were both too exhausted to run anymore, so we stopped to catch our breath. "What do we do? I'm so scared." "What happened to Lucas and Ezra?" asked Nicole as she struggled to breathe. "Your guess is as good as mine. Someone or something definitely took them," I replied. "We need to get to the car and get help," said Nicole. "Of course we do, but if we keep running in the dark, we'll just get more lost. We should stay here until light, then try making our way out," I said. "Okay," replied Nicole. I said nothing as we went and sat down under a large pine tree that was nearby. We sat there all night with our backs against the tree, keeping each other awake. Every little sound made us jump. When morning came, we could quickly tell we had no idea where we were. We knew which way east and west was, but the way back to the car was south, and our compass was back at camp. We talked for some time about what to do, but going back to camp was not something either of us wanted. We ultimately decided to head west because we'd eventually hit the highway. One big problem we had was that our boots were back at camp. We had only our socks on. This meant it was going to be a slow, painful hike out. Our feet were already bloodied, but we hadn't felt much pain during the night, not until the adrenaline had worn off. We were also cold, so we wasted no time in getting up and starting the hike out. We hiked as much as we could that day, but it was slow going. This did help take our minds off of what was lurking out there and what had happened to Lucas and Ezra, though. During the day, we talked about what we thought happened and came up with some strange ideas. I couldn't get what the voice had said out of my head. It kept repeating in my mind over and over. When it got dark, we found another tree to take cover under. As we sat there, we talked a lot about our school days and our families trying to stay awake, but at some point during the night, we fell asleep. "Amy, help me!" I remember hearing Nicole scream out as I was startled awake. I looked up to see a dark figure standing above me. I could only see the whites of his eyes as a deep voice said the same terrifying thing. "God, turn me into this hideous monster. I now desecrate his children." I was then smacked across my face hard enough it knocked me out. When I came to, I was being carried by the dark figure. What I assumed was some type of man. I could see Nicole on the other side being carried, but she looked limp, almost like she was dead. My first thought was to fight back and struggle to break free, but whatever was carrying me was much stronger than I was. That and my face hurt like hell, and I didn't want to get smacked again. We were carried for quite some time before we started going up a very steep mountain that was mostly made of rock, from what I could see being dark, with only stars giving some light. After going up the mountain for a while, all of a sudden the thing carrying me stumbled, causing me to be dropped. I started rolling quickly down the mountain, hitting rocks along the way. I kept rolling for what seemed like forever when suddenly everything went black. When I awoke, the sun was beating down on my face. As I slowly opened my eyes, I could see by the sun's position it had to be midday. It was then I noticed I had rolled under a giant fallen down pine tree with only my head sticking out. It took me some time to maneuver myself out from under the tree and into the open. I felt like I'd been hit by a train as I tried standing up. My head hurt the worst, though. I could see my blonde hair was covered in dried blood. It was then I remembered what had happened as I ducked down and started observing my surroundings, trying to figure out where I was. As I looked down the hill, I saw a small lake and thought, no, it can't be, until I looked over to the right and saw our camp. It then hit me. I was on the rocky mountain in front of our camp. I slowly stood up just enough so I could see over the tree, up the hill from where I'd rolled down. I wasn't sure how long I'd been out, but whatever had taken me and Nicole surely had to still be in the area. I looked around for a while, and after not seeing anything, I made the decision to head back to camp, grab my boots, pack, and get the hell out of there. As I made my way down the mountain, I never stopped looking over my shoulder, praying whatever it was wouldn't come for me. When I made it to camp, I quickly put my boots on. I also frantically looked for the car keys but couldn't find them. I gave up soon after, not wanting to stick around any longer than I had to. I then grabbed my pack and took off. All I could think about on the hike out was my friends and what had happened to them. I fought hard not to break down and cry. Part of me wanted to just give up and join them, but the thought of my family kept me pushing forward. As I made my way to the trail that would take me out, I must have looked over my shoulder 1,000 times, fully expecting each time to see the thing that took my friends. I hiked a long ways until I finally hit the highway, at which point it was already dark. I waited by the road until morning, then started walking along until a truck came by and picked me up. I know I'll never see my friends again. After telling her story, a search posse was quickly formed and sent to the area Amy showed them on the map. When they arrived at the lake, they were surprised to see the camp was all but gone. The only evidence that anyone had been there was the word, help, which had been scribbled in the dirt. The search posse scoured the area for days, including the Rocky Mountain, but never found anything. Amy was considered a suspect, but nothing was ever proven. She left Montana the following year. No one knows where she went and was never heard from again. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.